All right, let's dive into one of the most important stories in modern history, the birth of Indian nationalism. Now, this isn't just about politics. Nope. It's the story of how millions of people, separated by all sorts of things like language and where they lived, started to see themselves as one single nation, all aiming for one shared goal: freedom.
And to make sure we really get to the heart of this, we're going straight to the source material. Everything we're going to talk about today is pulled right from this text, so you're getting the essential facts, plain and simple. Let's see what it has to say. So first things first, what even is nationalism? Well, at its core, it's exactly what you see right here, this powerful feeling of oneness. It's that moment when all the lines that divide people start to blur and a new shared identity, a sense of us, really begins to grow. This single idea, it's the engine for the entire movement we're about to explore. But that brings up a really big question, doesn't it? I mean, people can be unhappy for years, for generations even. So what's the spark? What is it that takes all that individual anger and frustration and channels it into a huge, organized, nationwide movement? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out. Okay, so our story really kicks off after a massive event, the Revolt of 1857. Once that was put down, the old East India Company was gone, and India was brought under the direct, unified rule of the British government. And here's the crazy part, the great irony. This tightening of British control was the very thing that started to create a new, shared Indian identity. So, how did that happen? How did a foreign power's rule lead to a feeling of national unity? Well, it turns out the British themselves, totally by accident, laid the groundwork for their own opposition. It's a classic case of unintended consequences, where the tools they used for control actually ended up planting the seeds for a national awakening. And this slide just captures that irony perfectly. Look, the British built things like railways and telegraphs for their benefit, right? To move troops faster, to control the country better. But these very networks became the lifelines of a new idea. They allowed nationalists from all over to connect, to share ideas, and to realize, hey, we're all fighting the same fight. For the very first time, one single set of rules was creating one single shared Indian experience. But yeah, this newfound connection, it wasn't built on something happy. It wasn't built on shared success. It was forged in shared frustration. The very system that was connecting India was also the system that was oppressing it. And that common experience of hardship, that became the powerful glue that would start to bind the nation together. And this is where that frustration really started to boil over. It wasn't just one thing. It was a constant stream of humiliating policies. The Arms Act basically said Indians couldn't be trusted to own a weapon. The Vernacular Press Act tried to silence their newspapers. And the whole controversy over the Ilbert Bill sent a crystal clear message. Even a highly educated Indian judge could never be seen as an equal to a European. This wasn't just politics. It was a personal, daily injustice that millions of people felt. And underneath it all, it really came down to money. This idea of the drain of wealth is so important to understand. Just imagine a system that's designed to literally pump your country's resources out. Your raw materials, like cotton, get shipped to Britain, turned into expensive clothes, and then sold right back to you at a huge markup. This wasn't fair trade. It was a system that was making India poor to make Britain richer. But all this anger, no matter how justified, is just raw energy. It needs a direction. It needs a focus. It had to be transformed from just a feeling into an organized political force. And that transformation, that's what marks the beginning of organized politics in India, an era that was first defined by the moderates. Which brings us to a huge landmark year, 1885. This is the moment the Indian National Congress, the INC, was founded. It was the first political organization that could claim to speak for all of India, and it was designed to give a single, unified voice to all that rising nationalist anger. So for the next 20 years, from its founding in 1885 all the way to 1905, the Congress was really shaped by these leaders called the moderates. And it's so important to get their strategy because it was totally different from the more aggressive politics that came later. These guys weren't revolutionaries, they were more like architects, patiently trying to build the foundation for a national movement. But the slow and steady pace was about to change, dramatically. A single decision made by the British viceroy would be like throwing a lit match into a powder keg. It would totally transform the freedom struggle and push the entire movement in a much more aggressive and confrontational direction.
And boom, this slide captures that explosive moment. In 1905, the viceroy, a guy named Lord Curzon, announces he's going to partition Bengal. Now, the official reason was, oh, it's just for administrative efficiency. But everybody saw right through it. It was a classic divide and rule tactic to break the unity in Bengal, which was the heart of Indian nationalism. The reaction was immediate, it was massive, and it sparked the incredible Swadeshi movement.
So what was this Swadeshi movement? The word itself means of one's own country. And the strategy was as simple as it was brilliant. Hit the British Empire where it hurts most, in the wallet. By boycotting foreign goods and instead buying Indian-made products, people were making a powerful statement. It was a declaration of economic independence and self-reliance, what they called Atma Shakti. This was a brand new weapon in the fight for freedom.
Now, this whole crisis also caused a massive split inside the Congress itself. It exposed two completely different visions for India's future. On one side, you still had the moderates. They believed in British justice and used methods like petitions and appeals, prayers, really. But on the other side, you had the radicals. They had zero faith left in the British. They thought petitions were just begging. They wanted mass action, boycotts, strikes. And they were the first to really raise the electrifying demand for Swaraj, or complete self-rule.
This timeline shows you just how chaotic and decisive this period was. It's like a domino effect. The partition in 1905 sparks outrage. Then, the All India Muslim League forms in 1906, partly out of fear of Hindu majority rule. The next year, 1907, the Congress itself splits right down the middle. Then the British drive that wedge even deeper in 1909 with separate electorates. For almost 10 years, the movement was fractured, only managing to come back together for a short time in 1916.
But while the moderates were writing petitions and the radicals were organizing boycotts, there was a third group that was losing patience with both of them. For these people, politics was just too slow, too ineffective. They believed something different, something more dangerous, that freedom is never just given to you. It has to be taken by force.
This was the path of the revolutionary. These groups worked in the shadows, forming secret societies to train assassins and bomb makers. Their targets were very specific: unpopular, hated British officials. This wasn't about getting huge crowds in the streets. It was about something called the propaganda of the deed, the idea that one spectacular, violent act could shatter the myth of British power and awaken the entire nation.
So that leaves us with one last really big question to think about. The early freedom struggle wasn't just one story. It was basically a huge debate between three very different strategies. You had the patient, constitutional path of the moderates. You had the mass-based economic pressure of the radicals. And you had the violent, direct action of the revolutionaries. Petitions, boycotts, or bombs. Which path do you think really held the key to freedom? It's a question India itself would struggle with for decades to come.